Hello and welcome to Beards and Cars Rivals, a series where we pit two or more vehicles in a head-to-head showdown in ways that I would argue matter a lot more than just which one happens to be quicker down a quarter-mile drag. This is about real-world stuff, especially if you're a potential buyer and you're wondering which car to get. Which one is potentially better for you, depending on what your needs and wants from the car are. Now, of course, tell me down below if you are a potential buyer of an XKR. Tell me what your thoughts are at the start of the video, and then maybe look back at the end of the video and see if you still feel the same way. If you're just a petrol head, just a car fan, maybe you're not in a position to buy one but just enjoy cars, then still tell me down below which one of these two do you like more, and of course tell me why as well. Is it the look, the sound, the performance? What does it for you? Now, of course, I have to say straight off the bat that I have skin in the game when it comes to this video because I own an XKR, and I specifically chose it for a reason. I bought the 4.2, the 2007 shape, slightly older of course, with radically different specs in some cases, and we're going to get to why at the end of the video. For now though, we're going to compare the two. We are going to talk about performance, but we're also going to discuss stuff like used value, day-to-day practicality, even economy, which to some people probably won't matter, but it is still good to know because it's part of the showdown. So first of all, of course, the biggest difference between these two cars is the engine. In terms of keeping up with what you can see on screen, to keep it simple, the 4.2 litre in the video is the silver car, and the 5 litre is the black car. So whenever you see one of those on screen, that's the one we're talking about. And incidentally, if you're looking at the interior shots of the car, the 5 litre, that newer black car, is the one which has the larger R insignia in the headrest. So that's just an easy rule of thumb to keep up with what you're actually looking at on screen. Now, first of all, let's talk about that engine, because this older 4.2 model ran from 2007 to 2009, and then that 5 litre facelift took over in 2009 and ran until the end of the XKR, RIP of course, in 2014. Both are V8s, both are supercharged, but one is 0.8 of a litre larger than the other, and that's a pretty big difference between the two. So what did that actually mean in terms of performance? Well, of course, it's more than just a capacity increase. The power and torque are significantly higher. On that older 4.2, you got 420 horsepower compared to the newer car's 503. That is a big difference. The torque figure, which I would actually argue is more important than the horsepower, and I'll touch on why in just a second, is 413 pound-feet on that older car to 461 on the newer. Now, a lot of so-called petrol heads, or people who know just enough about cars to seem like they know what they're talking about, will often talk about horsepower and how important it is and how cool it is and how many revs the engine can do. None of that stuff, traditionally speaking, really deeply impresses me about a car. What does impress me about a car, or more specifically its engine, is usually the torque, because torque in a daily basis is actually what gets the job done. Torque is what allows the car to tow stuff in the case of an SUV. It's what allows for instance, all-wheel drive muscle car conversion of some radical kind to launch off the line with monstrous acceleration, and crucially, it's what allows pretty much any car to have better economy. Because the lower the revs with the higher the torque really means it's an engine that doesn't have to put in as much work, as much effort to get the job done. So if the engine can run lower, especially usually in conjunction with a smaller capacity, which neither of these cars are, it improves your economy. And of course there are far more factors than that, such as gearing and aerodynamics, but that's the general idea. Now, when it comes to these two engines, they've both got great amounts of torque. 413 on the older one, 461 on the new. They're both fantastic in that regard, and it gives them really what I would call lazy performance. And that sounds like a bad thing, but it's actually fantastic. So you get some little high revving, for instance, superbike feeling car, a Honda S2000 for example. It's great. Any Honda VTEC is a perfect example, or a Mazda rotary engine. They are incredible. They sound fantastic. They don't explode at 18,000 RPM necessarily, but that's kind of the point. You have to rag them to get the best out of the engine because they don't have that much torque. With a car that has a huge amount of torque, it's lazy. You barely have to put your foot down and the car just relentlessly wafts you forward into the distance regardless of the vehicle's weight, which is why something even like a huge Rolls-Royce with that big 6.75 litre engine, it's effortless performance. You don't have to rev the nuts off of the engine, it's got the torque. And of course, all of that torque and power translates to performance. In the case of the older car, the 0 to 60 is 4.9 seconds. On the newer car, 4.6. So factually speaking, it is faster. And of course, you'll have owners and pundits arguing back and forth all day long about, oh, this car's actually faster than what they say, this one's actually slower. It doesn't matter. It's an equalized footing. Those are the official numbers for both cars, so that's what we're going with. In terms of top speed, of course, in the UK, that doesn't really matter beyond barstool bragging rights, but incidentally, they are both kind of speed limited to 155 miles an hour, although we all know they can do over 175 in reality. And although I haven't personally taken both of these cars to VMAX, it wouldn't surprise me, let's just say, if the 5 litre has an advantage there. I would be more surprised if it didn't, let's be honest. Now, in terms of handling and driving feel and the fun factor, this is the part of the video that gets a little bit more murky, because there aren't really many hard facts that you can talk about when it comes to how a car feels. It's a very personal thing. Charisma, character, these words that people talk about that really just means whether or not you like it. Of course, the best way is to compare a lap time. So you could check out some lap time comparisons if you can find them between the two cars, but in terms of how they feel on real roads, not being pushed to their limit on the best tyres you can buy, I would actually say, in all honesty, it's pretty negligible. Both cars handle fantastically, beautifully. In fact, it's one of my favourite things about driving an XK of either model, and I would say that in a daily basis, you're not going to notice a huge amount of difference. Unless you intend on pushing these cars to their absolute limits around Silverstone every weekend, you're never going to notice a huge amount of difference. It's the same chassis, roughly the same aerodynamics, same kind of steering setup, it's just got more power, and one has less. So you could argue back and forth, but to me, it's not really that noticeable from a daily driving point of view. Now, in terms of another important thing to a lot of petrol heads, the sound, this is another one that's very much so down to personal interpretation. What one person likes the sound of is very different to somebody else, and at the start of the video you heard both cars back to back, and even though the audio quality might not be as high as, for instance, a studio, you can still tell enough of a difference. Now, the biggest difference I would say between the way the two cars sound is that the older one focuses more on having a deeper rumble, like a gurgle to it, that old school muscle sound. The newer car, the 5 litre, seems to have more of that pop and crackle kind of approach to its sound, which is in vogue, it's popular, more of a rally car or race car kind of thing, but to me I actually prefer the older one. I love the sound of the newer one, and in the case of the XFR, the 4-door Jaguar, which uses that same engine, I think it suits it down to a T. For me, this one being a long-distance GT car, I actually prefer that subtler, deeper rumble. With that being said, my car does have fuse 19 removed, so the exhaust valves are open all the time, so subtle it is not. I do, however, absolutely adore the way it sounds, and that's something to bear in mind. So if you want more of a pop and a crackle, go for the newer engine. If you want more of that deeper, kind of powerful sounding rumble, I would say go for the 4.2, such as I did. Now, in terms of the driving feel, to just keep on track with that handling and overall vibe that the car gives you, one of the most controversial things, maybe even the most controversial thing that I said about the 5 litre, is that I didn't find it that exciting to drive in comparison to the 4.2, and I stand by that. I've driven multiple 5 litres, multiple 4.2s, and I simply prefer the 4.2 consistently. In fact, the only case in which that flip-flops the other way is the normal XK. I like the 5 litre XK more than the 4.2 XK. Not so in the case of the R. And I'm not going to get into that 5 litre comparison in XK form just yet, because that's another video for another time. To me though, the reason why I say that about the 5 litre is, even though it does have more power, more torque, the more poppy, crackly exhaust, the shape and design and aerodynamics of the Jag XKR mean that most of the sound is actually way out there behind you. So everyone behind you can hear the car, but you inside it, not so much. Now, that's not something which I love about the car. I wish it was kind of louder inside, but the reason why is due to the shape of the vehicle, the aerodynamics, of course the wind flow being most of the noise that you can hear, but that just makes the 5 litre even quieter, because you can't hear those pops and bangs anymore, and the engine itself is a little bit lower in note. So to me, there's just less of a raucous kind of playful mood in the newer car. The easiest way to describe the difference between the two is something that I've actually mentioned before. I believe, in fact, I actually mentioned it in the video where I announced that I bought one. And that is that, to me, to really sum up the difference between the two, the 4.2 version feels like a Jaguar version of an Aston Martin. The 5-litre version, on the other hand, feels like the Jaguar version of a Bentley. To me, that really sums up why I feel the way I do and what I mean by the difference. The newer car, for all of its extra power and performance, actually feels strangely over-civilized, in my opinion, and I'm sure there are plenty of owners who disagree. I can only speak for myself, and as I said, I've consistently found that to be the case after driving multiple ones. So that's just where I stand on that issue. What then in terms of the practicality? Let's talk fuel tank, fuel range, miles per gallon, space, stuff which doesn't sound as exciting, but can actually really reveal some of the advantages and disadvantages of a certain car. Now, you'd assume that the smaller engine probably has better economy, and that's true. In fact, if you go to a website, for instance, such as Honest John, where owners can actually report the kind of economy that they get, and it aggregates it into an overall average, which tends to be more accurate than what manufacturers will tell you it can do. Well, in the case of this comparison, the older car does have better economy. Not by much, it's only 1 mile per gallon more average, but it means that the older 4.2 averages about 23 to the gallon, and the newer car averages about 22. Interestingly though, from the specs that I found, it seems that the older car may have a larger fuel tank, which is curious, because if that is true, that 0.6 of a litre larger, 70.6 compared to a 70 litre in the newer car, means that the fuel range is actually better on the older one. In fact, the difference is fairly notable. Overall, that gives you a rough fuel range of about 357 miles, and on the newer car, 339. That's a difference worth noting. In terms of the rest of the practicality, well, it's a pretty simple review in that regard because it's the same basic idea of a car that we're comparing. So of course, stuff like interior design, interior space, trunk space, they're going to essentially be exactly the same, so we don't need to linger on that because they pretty much cancel each other out. What I will say about the interior though is the single biggest difference is actually also one of the reasons why I prefer the older car, and that is the gear selector. And I've talked about this before. I absolutely love the selector in the XFR, the 4-door Jag with the same engine as the 5-litre XKR, because it has this twist knob way of selecting the gear that you want, which rises up out of the center console when you turn on the engine. It looks awesome, it's got a very clean, classy look, and it suits the car. To me, it actually doesn't suit an XKR as much, and I don't like it as much when they fitted it to the car. Now, of course, that's personal to me, and doubtless other people will swing completely the other way, but the 5-litre has that same idea. It rises up out of the center console, and you twist it left or right to select neutral, drive, reverse, etc. In the car that I bought, the 4.2, as you can kind of see in the video as well, it has a much more traditional clunk into place kind of shifter, which I personally adore. It feels fantastic to use. It's got a really chunky feeling of quality and power to it. There's just nothing like that feeling of clunking it into drive or into sport and feeling the power and torque. It just, again, kind of like people's preferences in sound, adds to my personal fun when I drive the car. Now let's talk pricing, and this is interesting because the older car is not that much different to the newer one in terms of baseline prices, and for those who are initiated, you may have noticed that that's actually quite a good thing in favour of the older car, because if the older one hasn't depreciated as much, that tends to be a point in its favour, because you can buy one of the older 4.2s for as little as about 10 grand. Now for 10 grand you'll be looking at a less than stellar one, maybe a few scratches, maybe something with the interior, light issues, and probably 6-figure mileage. I would not recommend getting one for less than 10 grand though, because if it's less, there's a reason, and at least that'll be crazy high mileage. Now incidentally, the engines are known for over 200,000 miles of ability, so high mileage isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, but you want to get lower mileage if you can, of course. Now in the case of the newer car, the lower end of the spectrum at the moment is about 14 grand. Typically a little bit closer to 15, so about £4,000 or £5,000 more, even for the equivalent higher mileage version of that 5-litre car. So that's actually a pretty big difference. It's 50% more expensive, another $5,000 on top of the $10,000 for the other model. Now, in reality, if you're looking for a good one, you should be expecting to pay more like $12,000 to $14,000 for a 4.2, or more like $15,000 to $18,000 for a 5-litre. Now, of course, you can easily pay way more to get super low mileage, really good condition ones, and this is where they really start to open the gap between each other. Because for a super low mileage, outstanding condition 4.2, you'd be looking at on the high range about $22,000. That's still really good for its age, and it kept a lot of value, and you can get as low as like 7,000 miles for that kind of price, which is crazy value. For the newer car, to get a super low mileage, outstanding, showroom condition example, well, you're going to need to fork out more like 35, sometimes even close to £40,000 still. And that's for a car which at the newest was from 2014, so at this point is 6-7 years old. So the price difference between the two is very, very significant. A baseline of $10,000 compared to a baseline of 15, with a more good value model being like $13,000 compared to about 18, means that across the board you're looking at pretty much a $5,000 difference. Now, once again, I think that actually kind of says a lot about the older car. The fact that it's still $5,000 close to the newer one kind of says a lot for a huge difference in years. A 2007, for instance, is a full 7 years older than the last of the 5 litres, and it's still only $5,000 different. Overall then, which one should you get? Which one is the car for you? Well, I suspect that for a lot of potential buyers, you'll have heard the things that I've said in this video and come to your own conclusions. It's pretty clear that regardless of opinion, the newer car is clearly the better performance car. More power, more torque, bigger engine, better acceleration, and more likely than not, a superior top speed. And I would bet money that it's probably quicker around a track too, for obvious reasons. In terms of practicality and affordability, and I would argue even bang for buck value, well, I would give it to the older car. Slightly better economy, a slightly better fuel range to the tank, way more affordable used values for the amount of car that you get. Well, it means that it really does depend on what your absolute most important thing is. The smaller details are very much up to you, stuff like which gear selector you prefer, which sound you prefer, which one you find more fun or more engaging, and crucially, of course, which one you like the look of more. In fact, a number of people have said to me, surely you think the 5-litre looks better. Well, actually, I honestly don't. I think the 5-litre looks stunning, but I prefer the look of mine. Honestly. Every time. And one of the reasons why is that front bumper. It has the extra kind of inserts with those small driving lights, whereas the newer car has the larger, more sweeping intakes. I understand loving the new car, it's certainly a fantastic looking machine, but for me, I like the 4.2 more, and those reasons that I mentioned in the video are basically the main ones that swayed me in that direction. My advice to a potential buyer is drive both. And potentially even drive the XKs as well, because the 300 horsepower XK is even cheaper on the spectrum at more like $7,000, and I will tell you that that 5-litre XK with 385 horsepower is the dark horse. It is a very good car, and it has a feeling of stately elegance, which I would say the R model doesn't have. So by all means, check out as many different XKs as you can if you're looking to buy one. These are my thoughts on the 4.2 versus the 5-litre, so I hope you enjoyed this video. Of course, subscribe to the channel if you want to check out more, and I am going to have more coming very soon, including another Jaguar Showdown, this time though between the 5-litre XKR in this video and its unintentional rival, the 4-door XFR. Might seem like a strange showdown, but bear with me. I think you might be surprised by how valid that rivals match is. So of course stick around on the channel for that, tell me your thoughts down below, and of course it helps if you comment, like and share the video immensely. Until next time though, I'll see you then, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.